Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. Let us know where you think we got it right and where you think we got it wrong. You can do that by going to unsilentpodcast.com or visit us on Rumble, Facebook, or other social channels. So let's get into it. Brian, I think you had some interesting things to share today, didn't you?
I do. So I just got back from a week and a half of vacation. So before I go too far, we're for people who are just tuning in for the first time, this podcast is talking to people who live, roughly 60 years in the future, 70 years in the future. Dave and I are doing our best to kind of chronicle what this moment in time is like. We're speaking to the future generation. We've dubbed the males in the future Kenny G, as in Generation G, which is about the time that they'll be middle-aged adults and kind of be going through what we went through in the early 2000s, and they'll find themselves around this period of the cycle of that we were going through, where they're gonna be wondering, kind of like we are, like, what the heck is going on, and that's who we're talking to in this podcast. I think that's important for what I'm about to ask. So I go on vacation for a week and a half. So my first question, Dave, is: do you think 70 years from now, a vacation will still even be a thing? Or is it going to be like the holodeck on Star Trek: The Next Generation, where people just slap on their VR thing or step into a VR room and poof, they're there and they don't really have to travel anymore? What do you think?
Well, so I think there's a 50-50 chance it'll be one of two things. It'll be one, yes, you'll put on your Facebook 3.0 or Facebook 10.0 virtual reality headset and go to Tahiti or to Fiji or to the Grand Caymans or to Mars or wherever.
Yeah.
And you will have the plug-in into your brain so that you can actually smell the salt air and hear the birds without getting poop on your hand, the whole thing. So I think it's either going to be that, or it wouldn't surprise me at all, Brian, if there was a sort of a retro revolution where it's like, hey, let's disconnect a little bit from all this technology and let's put it in its place. And we'll actually take regular vacations and go see trees and shrubs and, the ocean and all that. It wouldn't surprise me if we just get too much of this tech that I love so much that I do.
A renaissance back to good old fashioned feet on the beach vacations.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So now that you say both those things, I think both those are going to be true with one thing in the middle. So I think it's going to be the holodeck,
right?
And we'll have this VR thing. But then what's going to happen is all the guys are just going to want to go to the holodeck strip clubs, and that's the only locations that they will pick. And then they'll get tired of that, and they'll say, "We need to go back to real vacations again." So I think
probably true. Yeah, that's probably true. I think you're right. Well, there'll at least be a 30-year period when the birth rate will completely plummet, because that's what's going to happen.
Right. So, okay. So I go on vacation. My wife and I, we go to the island of St. Martin, which is a Dutch colony, basically, still. Or actually, it's half Dutch, half French, right? And so we come back yesterday. We fly back into the U.S. And as a U.S. citizen with a passport and a new ID, that's like what they call it, the real ID or whatever. Allow me to travel with unfettered access to travel, whatever. I had to show my passport. My wife and I each had to show our passports 7 times to get from St. Martin through the first airport that we came back to. And so we're in this line of, we're being herded like cattle through the airport in Atlanta. And we're being herded through this maze of, that movie theater,
turnstile.
That kind of that vinyl kind of rope stuff, that they can move and whatever. That's what that's called. And I mean, we probably, all kidding aside, we probably walked through that maze. Atlanta's a big airport, and it's an international thing, and we're coming in from out of the country. We probably walked 3/4 of a mile, I would guess, through that vinyl maze or whatever. And the whole time we're just laughing about, if we were not from the U.S. and we just decided to cross the border in Tijuana or in Tucson or Yuma or down in South Texas, none of that hassle would be required. Like
Well, I was going to say, Brian, you're a very inefficient man. You should have just worn a T-shirt that said "refugee"
right.
from anywhere.
Yeah,
And if somebody talked to you, just no English, no English, you would have
yeah.
gotten the fast track, buddy. Come on.
Yeah. So next time I'm gonna declare myself a refugee from Azerbaijan. Was
Yeah,
your
Azerbaijan is what I'm thinking. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're
that
a
sounds
persecuted
exotic.
refugee. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's a good
and
idea.
then it's funny but not funny at the same time. Like, I live in the Phoenix area now, where there's literally have been signs posted that say, if you're an immigrant and you don't want to get your picture taken, just let us know, we'll skip that part. But I, as a citizen, don't have that benefit. And there's lines in airports for people to say, this is just for people who are here without any kind of documentation. We know you don't have documentation, so you go through this list line, which is one might call it an expedited line. It was just funny that was happening. So anyhow, I had time to think about some things, and this one video clip, I just stumbled upon this like the day I left. So this is a couple weeks ago I saw this, and I'm going to play it for you. And I think this is a great illustration of the kind of government we have now. The reason I think this is important is because 50 or 60 or 70 years from now, just like we still watch videos of Nixon talking and JFK talking and Eisenhower talking and FDR talking, we don't really hear much from, we don't watch clips of the cabinet positions. We don't watch
Right.
clips of lesser positions. It's like the presidents and maybe a vice president here or there, maybe an ambassador here or there,
Right.
whatever. Those are the people we watch that many years later. So this clip I'm going to show you is bound to be lost in the shuffle over the next several decades. But I thought this just encapsulated perfectly the kind of government we have working for us right now, and serving at our pleasure at this moment in time. Dave, is how we should
Good.
refer to these folks.
I'm ready to be inspired, Brian. I'm ready to be inspired. Bring it.
Well, don't get too excited here, because this is about a minute and 20 seconds, so it's a little long, but I think it's such a fantastic clip. And the question, the young lady who is talking to this guy, whose name is Jared Bernstein, looks like he's the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors to the President. That seems like
Well,
that's his official title.
Yeah. He looks like a smart guy. That's a
Quite a
pretty
moniker
high
he's
title.
got there, and a big fancy title. And
Yeah.
the question she's asking is, if the government can print money,
Right.
why does the government need to borrow money? So the
That's
government,
a great question.
yeah. So in a world where you can print all the money you need, her question is, why then are we as a government borrowing money? And so here's his minute and 20-second-ish long answer.
All right.
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to yeah, I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
Okay, so
Brian,
yeah,
we're doomed. We're doomed.
So I just appreciate him taking the time to clear things up, and now I don't know about you, but I have a whole new grasp on how this works.
I looked him up. He is an economist. He's a leading economist. He's a leading economist, and he doesn't know how it works.
Well, I don't know how humor will work in 50 or 60 or 70 years, but this is one of those things where in our moment in time, we say things like we have to laugh because otherwise we would have to cry, or we would have to become so enraged that we would like lose our sanity. It's a very like gallows humor kind of laughter that is
Yes.
happening here. And it, it is just so unbelievable that a person who's an advisor to the president on
Yes.
economics, who is an economist, cannot explain why in a world where we can print all the money we need, why do we borrow money? Now, I would imagine there's like legitimate reasons for that. It's probably better in some cases to owe money to debtors than it is to inflate the currency. I don't even have a college education. I did not spend one day on a college campus in a class ever, but I can muster up some kind of lame ass answer like that, and I'm not an economist. The notion that this guy spends his time, he reminded me of the Saturday Night Live guy from like it was John Lovitz. John Lovitz. Remember
Yeah.
he was like, yeah, that's the ticket. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
You remember that?
we print money. Yeah. So we print money and we also we lend money. Yeah, that's the ticket. He reminded me of that guy, right?
Yeah. I can't. I mean, he's advising the most powerful person in the world, the president, on the biggest economy in the world, the United States.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I can't explain it. I just can't. He throws around words like MMT, modern monetary theory. No, he can't explain it. Yeah, we're doomed.
So my question on these things always defaults to, is it worse if he really doesn't know? Or is it worse if he knows and just won't or can't say? Like, which of those things would be worse?
Well, you're talking about two paths to hell. They both end in the same spot, So I'm not really sure that it matters because, I mean, the dude obviously is clueless on the very thing that he is hired to advise.
Or he's just lying through his teeth, and the answer is so bad that he would rather look like a complete buffoon than to give us the real answer.
Well, if that's the case, he's a very good actor because he looked truly like deer in the headlights. I mean, he did. He looked like he was, like, don't ask me those hard questions. Ask me about, who's on the dollar bill. I might be able to tell you that. I mean,
I didn't count, but I think he restated the question something like 4 or 5 times. I didn't count, but he went through this whole process of, well, we definitely print money.
yes.
And we definitely lend money. Like he explained that a handful of times.
Just kind of figuring it out as he goes.
Which, again, I'm not an FBI profiler, but I'm going to guess that has some kind of indication that a person's like full of shit, right?
That's rather scary. That this
Oh,
is
okay. So the monetary situation is a disaster right now.
Yes.
Their inflation is going absolutely bananas. Even though we keep altering how we measure it, we keep making
Right.
it more government friendly in how we report it. It's still getting worse and worse and worse.
Right.
By any metric other than the value of the S&P 500, by any other
Right.
metric, things are going in a very bad direction. Meanwhile, though, the stock market, the S&P 500 is at an all-time high. As we're recording it today, it broke the record on an all-time high.
Yep.
So other than that one thing, though, like, unemployment's starting to become, people are starting to get there's layoffs happening, especially in like tech industries and things like that. Inflation is going like berserk. Trucking is the indicators that things are slowing down are happening, whatever. Okay. And this stuff happens. Like, I'm not like there's ebbs and flows to the economic cycle. I'm not criticizing anyone for that. That's a reality of how markets work.
Sure.
The part that I am criticizing is they either can't explain what their strategy is, or they don't have a strategy, or the ones who we think are in charge are not really the one in charge. And so, like, this guy who's the advisor on the economic council to the president, it's kind of seems like, all kidding aside, like it kind of seems like he's not in the know on what's happening, which would indicate that maybe someone else is making decisions, not the people who are being appointed, or and again, I want to get like too tinfoil hatty here.
Yeah.
best guess? Like what does
Well,
this mean? What is it we just saw? What does it mean?
I mean, so first of all, the in thing, the popular thing in the circles that he runs in, because I pay attention to that stuff, is he mentioned MMT, modern monetary theory.
Right.
And the basis of modern monetary theory is that when a government has fiat currency, in other words, we say this is money. He mentioned we print money. We can
Yeah.
print $100 trillion. We can print
Yeah.
10 quadrillion dollars. We can print as much money as we want to. And modern monetary theory that he and the other people in his cohort subscribe to, even if they can't explain it,
Yeah.
is the idea that government debt is not a bad thing. And if you have fiat currency, and this really, here's the history of it. This really started when we decoupled from the gold standard back in, I think it was 72. Was it that Nixon
Yeah. That sounds right.
decoupled us, somewhere around there? So before then, there were controls on what you could do with money, how much money you could print, what you could do with it, etc. It's only been in the past several years, since COVID really, that the people have started to move away from those controls, even though they weren't technically necessary after the currency became, not backed by anything tangible. And so the idea behind modern monetary theory is whatever you need to print, go for it. And especially because you can pay off any debts, whatever debt you need to go into, go for it, because it's denominated in your own currency. So Brian, I make Dave notes, right? And I'm going to loan you 500 Dave notes. And if I want to deflate or inflate the cost of those Dave notes, I'll print more or less.
Right.
So I control the entire process from beginning to end. And the US in particular gets away with this more than any other place on the planet, because guess what? The world's debt is denominated in Federal Reserve notes, in our currency. So therefore, they don't care about, our debt, or the United States debt can't be paid off. Under the current scenario that we have, we can't pay it off. It's not going to be paid. The amount of money that we will pay on interest, I don't remember what the exact date was because I don't have it in front of me, but the amount that we will start paying on interest on the U.S. debt in the next several years will be far bigger than anything else other than the entitlements, which we have promised to people that we can't actually fulfill either, because Social Security's got 10 years before it's bankrupt. So what are we going to do? We're going to print gobs and gobs more money. We're going to issue gobs and gobs more debt, and nobody cares until the entire house of cards comes crashing down. Now, you mentioned just a moment ago the ebbs and flows of natural cycles, and economies do go through ups and downs. They go through, expansions and recessions, and expansions and recession. And they're in a normal scenario, those expansions and recessions every 18 or so months, 20 months, whatever, are relatively mild. They're not like the Great Depression, which was a perversion of all of that. Not to get too far into the weeds of this, but when people start doing what this is doing based on fiat currency and modern monetary theory, it can't do anything except eventually, someday, and it might be in Kitty G's day. It might take that long till the whole thing just comes crashing in on itself, because eventually nobody's going to want the dollars anymore.
Right. Well, and the other thing that I think is interesting about this. So first of all, before we get too far, could you explain what fiat currency means?
You bet. So prior to the gold standard being eliminated, every dollar that was issued by the United States government was backed by a certain amount of gold that the United States government had. It's a tangible thing with intrinsic value. Fiat currency says that it's not backed by gold anymore, but it's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. In other words, it's what we say it is. We're good for it.
On the
It's an
reputation
IOU.
of the government to pay it back.
Yeah, it's an IOU. So the government basically owns it.
It's as good as the faith we have in the government, but there's nothing really specifically to back it other than that faith.
There's no tangible asset to back it up. Right. It's just based on our faith.
What I think is interesting about this. So you and I have talked about the cycles of the the different generations. You got the nomads and the prophets and the artists and the what's the other one? The art
prophets, nomads, artists, and heroes.
Heroes. Yeah. Okay. So and I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm a nomad, and the millennials are the heroes, and we go through these cycles where every 80-ish to 100 years we go through these cycles where um, there's an awakening, there's a crisis, and we're entering the crisis phase. What I find interesting is the economic cycle isn't that far off from that.
Right.
It's also on around an 80 to 100
Sure.
year cycle. So if we go back around 80 years, of course, there's the Great Depression. If
Yep.
you go back 80 years before that, around the time of the Civil War, there was a similar thing. And going back to, the 1700s, you can kind of follow the Dow Industrial whatever,
Sure.
that can go back as far as the 1700s, where you see these you mentioned the expansions and retractions in 18-month cycles and whatever.
Yeah.
There's also ones that are 7 to 10 years that are now being more extracted out to 10 to 12 to 15 years because of intervention by central banks and whatever. But overarching on all those, there's kind of an 80-ish year cycle,
Right.
just like we have with, from one, crisis era to the next.
Right.
Oftentimes it's about a depression or a financial collapse. Also, it could be about a total war.
Yep.
Every crisis era has a total war, and every total war has been in a crisis era. So that's we get that to look forward to possibly. And what that means, again, I don't know that'll mean like you know trenches and muskets and that kind of thing. I don't think it'll be exactly like that kind of thing
Right.
again. But historically speaking, gnarly things happens around these time, including the financial collapse.
Yes.
And so it kind of feels like again, we talk, you and I talk about like the contrasting the guys who were fighting in World War II and the
Right.
women who were stateside doing the things that they were doing to support the effort, and the duty those people felt and the responsibility they felt and the obligation they felt to make things
Sure.
that worked and supported this society and things like that. And you contrast that with this dude who
Yeah.
we just
Oh my gosh.
talked for 82 seconds about. And those things are not even on the radar. Like I don't think he's even on the same kind of plane as those folks were operating back then. So how could it go any other way than the monetary system collapsing? Because this guy is not operating with the same kinds of guiding principles that they were in 1945 or 1950.
Well, and and this is part of the problem with when you start off with a presupposition that is false, and then you build a sort of a framework on top of that. So, if you start off with a proposition that you can borrow money and print money forever, and there's going to be no consequence to that, then what you build on top of that can be very logical in a sort of a self-contained way, but eventually it gets so big and unwieldy that the bottom just collapses out of the whole thing. And this is the case with all systemic problems. This is the case with communism that ultimately doesn't work because it's built on a faulty foundation. It's the problem with this theory of economics that says that debt is not important. You can get as much as you want forever if you want to, and it'll just keep expanding forever, which common sense says, no, that's not possible. You can kick the can down the road for a while.
You're stuck in old school thinking, Dave. Like
Well, you see, yeah, there you
you
go.
need to get on board with the way things are now.
And then that's how this guy can be a leader and can propose modern monetary theory and do it with a straight face, although he can't explain it with a straight face, it seems like. That's how all of that can happen.
Got annoyed at the end, by the way. Did you notice how he got annoyed at the end?
Yeah.
Like, I shouldn't even have to be explaining this kind of stuff. Like,
that's right. Well, it also goes to the other theory, and that is that there are elites and there are plebes. We are the plebe class. We are not supposed to question the elites. That's not allowed.
It just again, I keep kind of coming back to a handful of common things that keep popping into my head as you and I go through the different ways that these issues are manifesting themselves in different pockets of society and how the world works and things like that. I keep coming back to a handful of things. And one of those is how you do anything is how you do everything.
Right.
And so everything the government does is like this guy, right? We do stuff and we do stuff. And then, and we do these things and we do those things. And we do these things and we do those other things. And well, I can't really explain how or why. And I don't, but we do these things,
Trust
so
me.
whether you're talking about the border, whether you're talking about, getting away from the Constitution as like foundational guiding principles and like actually honoring the Constitution,
Right.
or whether you're talking about, getting away from the American dream, which was allowing, lower and middle class people to earn their way to higher incomes, or the American dream of valuing a person based on their character and the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Like all these things in each of their own in little ways, they're doing the same thing this guy is doing. We're just doing things that we can't explain or won't explain, and we just keep saying over and over, we do these things, but they can't ever connect the dots on why or how it benefits anybody, or what the vision of success is later on, or specifically connecting dots on like there's this problem and we were aiming for this outcome and here are the steps we're taking. There's none of that stuff on
Right.
any of these things. And so this is the monetary version of it, but this is how they're doing, it feels to me, this is how they're doing all the stuff.
Well, it is. It's a function of being an elite. If you are an elite, and it's really a technocratic way of looking at the world. If you are an elite, then you believe that one, you have that sort of mantle of knowledge and intelligence and experience that can solve any problem. And therefore, everybody else shouldn't ask you why. I mean, we learned this in COVID. Stop. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why. You should just trust the elites.
We're just shutting the schools down. And we're just injecting the kids. Well, but why?
No,
well, we're
no,
shutting
no,
the
no,
schools
no,
down,
no,
and we're
don't
injecting
ask.
the kids. And
Right, don't ask.
okay, help me understand why. Well, but we're injecting the kids and we're shutting the schools down. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
it's the same exact act. It's just a different topic.
Right. And so the point of being a technocrat is that you think that you have enough little levers in your toolbox. I mean, you're kind of like a little watchmaker tinker that's got all these little levers. Okay, if this happens, we'll pull this lever, we'll do that. We can fix anything with this sort of technocratic approach to things. When at the same time, it's kind of like pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. Well, I'm going to go up to the moon by just putting one foot up and then pulling the other foot up, and forget, what about gravity? Well, no, just trust me. I've got the tools to do this. So that's what folks in these situations really are sort of believing. And I think they really believe it. I think they believe that they've got enough tools and enough, technology and enough cleverness that they can circumvent the rules of economics. They can circumvent the rules of just common sense and life and how people interact and react to different circumstances. I think they honestly believe that. And so that's when the guy's annoyed, sure, because you're not supposed to ask an elite to explain themselves. You're supposed to trust them that they can take care of this and trust your well-being to them because you're not smart enough.
So let's just do a little thought experiment here. So you throw or help me throw out some. So like we covered the obvious one he just did. We covered the COVID thing with the schools, and
Sure.
the green thing would be one. Like what are the top 1, 2, or 3 things we're doing green stuff? There's like the windmills.
Well, sure. I mean, there's solar
cars.
panels, there's windmills, there's
Okay. So we're gonna do windmills, and we're gonna do electric cars. Now, you and I believe that the grid can't handle the demand that we place on electric cars. Like in
Right.
California and Texas, they're doing rolling brownouts and blackouts, and like bad things happen when everybody turns on the air conditioning.
Sure.
But we're requiring more electric cars without updating the system. So you and I might
Right.
say, well, the restriction might be the capacity of the system. And they would say, well, yeah, but we're going to do windmills and we're going to have electric cars. And we would say, well, yeah, but explain how the capacity of the system would increase. And they go, well, but you understand, we're doing electric cars and windmills. And so it plays there. It plays with COVID. It plays with the economic stuff. I guess like the border thing. Okay, so the restriction might be there's not enough housing for these people. You and I have been hearing that house prices are going up at an astronomical rate for the last 10 or 15 years because of a housing shortage. So we're bringing in millions of people. So a restriction, not the restriction, but a restriction would be there's not enough housing here. So you and I would say, well, there's not enough housing. And they would go, yeah, but we're bringing in illegals to do the jobs that nobody else wants to do. And, these people have a right, just like we do, to have this stuff. And so we're bringing people in and we're and we're helping them. And we say, yeah, but there's not enough housing. Yeah, but we're bringing people in and we're helping them.
Right.
But there's
Right.
not enough housing. Yeah, but we're bringing people in and we're helping them. So that plays.
Yeah.
What-
It's yeah.
the woke stuff, the trans stuff. You and I might argue that if you can't have the intelligence or aptitude or decision making ability to decide if you should smoke or not, or buy a gun or not, maybe cutting off your genitals might not be the best thing.
Yeah.
And they
Maybe
would
not.
say, well, yeah, but we're doing gender affirming surgery. Yeah, but you can't undo this, and if they can't make those decisions, maybe they should make this decision. Yeah, but we're doing gender affirming surgery because these kids know, and we're doing the like all these things. They just talk about what they're doing,
Right.
and they don't ever talk about how it really benefits anything, I guess is my point.
Well, and it's single factor or very few factor decision making. In other words, you say, here is the problem. So let's take gender dysphoria. So gender dysphoria is a real condition that some people have. And so, okay, you've got this condition. Therefore, we are going to do gender affirming care. We're going to give you hormones. We're going to cut things off. We're going to do all this stuff because of this gender dysphoria. Not asking the question, well, now it's starting to be asked because lots of people are saying this didn't help me. You cut this stuff off. You gave me these wrong hormones and now my life is ruined and I feel worse than I ever did. So, but initially it's like, here's the problem. We can fix the problem by doing these things. Well, but what about the other? No, we're going to fix this problem by doing these things. Same thing's true with the border. If you look at, well, there's people in Honduras, in Guatemala, pick whatever country that are being oppressed. And therefore we are a compassionate country. We got to accept them in. Yeah. But what about the people that'll come with them that are terrorists and are coming from other countries that mean us? Well, no, but we got to help these people. So it's single factor.
What about the ones that are chanting "Death to America" as they cross the border? Well, yeah, but we need to help the other people, though.
Well, we got to help the other people. So the problem with every one of those situations is, if not single factor, maybe one or two factors.
Right.
Something is analyzed. This something that is analyzed is a real thing. And it becomes all important, and other considerations fall off, regardless of if those other considerations ultimately prove to be more of a problem than the first thing you were trying to solve. That's the same thing that's happening if you look at foreign policy and what we do in a lot of places in foreign policy. Well, right now they're arguing about whether Israel should ultimately wipe out the last 4 battalions of Hamas soldiers. Yeah, but all these other people they're going to be civilian casualties of war, as there have been. It's too much. Well, but are you proposing that it's a good thing that Hamas, a terrorist organization bent on the genocide of a certain people called the Jews, is no? But you can't. Don't talk about that. This is the single consideration we need to think about: civilian casualties. And an intelligent country and intelligent decision makers would say, we're going to consider all of the factors that are involved. We're going to rank. You and I do this in business all the time, Brian. There's 14 factors. Now, what's the process? We got to rank order these factors to see which one's the most important versus the least important. We come up with a system that deals with the most important things first and finds a way to address the exceptions to the rule, right? You make a system that addresses the rule, and then you make exceptions to it. Same thing with any one of the things we're talking about. It's bad thinking.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the things that I think we've been conditioned to believe is that all politicians have always been ignoramuses, right? Like the kind of the joke nowadays is, or a joke now is, would you trust Joe Biden to run an ice cream shop? That's one that I've heard, right? And the answer is kind of like, well, not if I wanted it to be profitable, right? Or the people in California that are just like imposing tax after tax after tax after tax or whatever. Would you want them in charge of your food truck? The restaurants they shut down? Could they run one of the restaurants that they shut down? And the answer is no. But if you look back in history, like, would I trust JFK to run an ice cream shop? Absolutely.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Carter, his family ran a peanut farm. They were very successful. Would I trust Ronald Reagan to run a restaurant? Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting to look throughout history, and you and I've talked about this in early episodes we did, where the worst ranking presidents have been the ones at this point in coming into the crisis era, and it seems like it's because they get into this mode of, like you're talking, limited or single factor decision making, this kind of um I don't know if it's always been elitist, but kind of um decision making that's not grounded in reality so much,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
that, like today's version is modern monetary theory and these
Yeah.
other things. Like you can just have unlimited whatever because it feels good in the moment, and whatever the consequences we thought they were there 10 years ago, that's old school thinking. Again, no matter what it is, whether it's the border, whether it's transing the kids, whether it's
Right.
the monetary theory, like all these things are, we just dismiss the things that we used to consider as um, significant consequences to avoid,
Right.
and anyhow, it just
Well,
feels like this stuff is all cyclical, and it's, again, it feels to me like how they do anything is how they do everything. How they
yeah.
assess, like how California went from having $100 billion surplus to 2 years later having a $46 billion shortfall or whatever, $64 billion shortfall, whatever it
Yeah.
is, in literally like 24 months.
Yeah.
Well, how that happened is the same thing that this guy is doing. And
Yeah.
how that happened is the same reason they're doing the trans things with kids, where you wouldn't treat a kid with bulimia that way. You
No.
wouldn't say, oh, you have a food addiction. Here, we're going to give you more food.
Right.
You wouldn't
Right.
do that.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it too is we're talking, if we talk about politicians now, or politicians during, or leaders of any sort during a crisis era versus those in a non-crisis era, there was a sense, I think, of some level of normality and of responsibility towards community standards, right? I
Yeah.
mean, in JFK's time, well, I mean, historically we know that JFK was quite the womanizer and did all sorts of things that even today
Yeah.
we would think are,
So I've heard. Yeah.
yeah, pretty, but he kept it all private and he didn't want to have anybody see it or anything like that, because even in that situation, there was a sense of, no, we have to keep this common culture and this common
Yeah.
commitment to
Decorum.
right and wrong and decorum, et cetera, in place. Whereas today, that's not the case. That's not the case at
Right.
all. It devolves into factionalism, into I'm going to just please this small group over here and say whatever they want to hear. It doesn't matter if I believe it or it makes sense or not. I'm going to say whatever what they want to hear. I'm not going to provide any analysis of whether this is wrong or that's wrong or multi-factors that affect it all. I'm just going to try and please this group because it's a free for all. So I think that's where what happens in this. So it goes back to a cultural breakdown. So it's not that people are any stupider today, despite the clip that we just saw, than
Yeah.
they ever were before. But it's that it probably this guy in this clip was probably a very intelligent guy, and he was having a difficult time squaring reality with what his policy is. It's like, how can I explain this in a way that makes sense? Well, I guess I really can't because it doesn't make sense, but I can't say that. So,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, I don't think the guy is not intelligent. I think the guy, I mean, he's certainly more intelligent than me about the economy. He's an economist.
he's an
Like
economist.
even if you went to a junior college or a community college and graduated with some kind of certificate or degree in, economy 301 or however that stuff works, like you would have a better grasp on this stuff than me, right? Okay, so I don't think it's an education issue. I don't think
Right.
it's an intellect issue. I think it's a ethics issue,
Sure.
a morality issue,
Right.
and a criteria by which you assess something to be good or bad issue.
Right. Yeah. Well, and and those things then go back to culture. Those
Right.
things ultimately go back to culture. I think you could probably take that guy as an example, deposit him back in, 1965, and he might end up looking like your average white collar, college professor and, with a reasonable way of looking at the world. So I think the culture, this is back to that idea of, nature, nurture and all that. I think culture oftentimes then pushes people into these weird positions where they are, there's what they call cognitive dissonance when
Yeah.
you know something, but you say something else. It's
Yeah.
it's
You
disconnected.
can't square it. Yeah.
You just can't square it. And I think there's a whole bunch of that. I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating is I've listened to a variety of politicians who are on podcasts and interviews that are not highly politicized. They're on something else, and they sound eminently reasonable and eminently logical. And they sound like somebody you could sit down and have a good conversation with. But then you see them on a Sunday show, on a news show or something, and they sound like a completely different person. They sound like a complete lunatic, a loon bin that's pushing positions that the other guy that you saw on this other, maybe it's a music, interview show or something. They sound reasonable. So how is that? And I think what happens is you have a societal cognitive dissonance based on the tribalism that we have, that the culture pushes us towards in a crisis era, because in a crisis era, everybody's rewarded for being the loudest and the most, shrill, advocating for your own position, and everything else be damned. I think that's
Yeah.
where that's where we're at. And so we need a great reset, not the kind that, that we hear about
Yeah.
in the news. We need a great
Yeah.
reset. And that great reset, thanks to God or the world, will come, or some combination thereof, will come as a result of a monumental crisis where operating that way is not going to work, and
Yeah.
we'll be brought back to zero and build ourselves up again.
It kind of, as I'm listening to you talk that through, and that all makes perfect sense. It kind of feels like to me like, having had young children, toddlers, it's like you put a toddler in the other room in their bedroom to play for a while or whatever, and then you go and you get distracted. And we all have that kind of that sixth sense, like when it's too quiet,
Yeah.
and you're like, wait a second, okay, well, if you ignored that sense and you're like, yeah, that's good, they're quiet, like yeah, things are great, they're having a good time, they're being peaceful and leaving me alone. So I'm gonna go, instead of doing my thing in the living room, now I'm gonna work my way into the kitchen. I'm gonna be a little further away, and well, it's still quiet in there, and well, that's working out good. So I'm gonna go outside and mow the lawn, and it's still quiet in there. And the further we get away, the more damage they can do.
Right.
And it kind of feels like that with the people who are, you're calling them elites. I would call them more like, I'll say nincompoops. How about that? That'd be a very kinder, gentler way
That's
of
very
saying what I
reserved
would.
of you, Brian. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So the more we as the collective distance ourselves from the toddlers doing the painting the walls with their own feces and cutting off their
Right.
own hair and like setting the furniture on fire and whatever, but we don't hear anything because we're distracted with our own thing. The more we take our eye off what they're doing, the
Yeah.
more damage they can do. And it feels to me like the great reset, that again, not the one that the Klaus Schwabs of the world
No.
are aiming for, but the one that is probably inevitable,
Yeah.
is when we collectively go, holy crap, we've given them too much free reign and we've taken our eye off the ball too much, and we
Right.
got to rein these nincompoops in.
I think
and
I'm rubbing off on you, Brian.
yeah, well, it's that sophisticated Evergreen State College education of yours that's really working its way through finally. So I don't know. As you're talking through that stuff, it feels to me like that like the more they feel elitist and but they're
Yeah.
making really dumb decisions, but there's no way to hold them accountable. And the less accountability, the more dumb decisions they can make. The more dumb decisions they make, the harder it is for us to rein them in. The
Right.
further we distance ourselves from it, and it's kind of like this doom loop. It feels like, and
Yeah.
then something will happen that is so catastrophic that we will say, okay, enough is enough. Now we need to get control again.
Right. And that's what it is, because part of that process is they make dumb decisions. We have to deal with the consequences of those dumb decisions. So we have less time and less energy and focus to prevent them from doing the next, crazy thing, which then takes it. So, why don't the people stand up and say, no, we don't want to be, we don't want to indebt our children to, $200 trillion or some such thing. We don't want, well, because we're too busy dealing with the here and now and inflation and all these other things. So it ultimately does take an extra, even if we want to, because there's plenty of people. I mean, like right now, economically, every opinion poll, regardless of what what Biden or anybody else says, every opinion poll says, yeah, things are kind of tough economically. The only people that will disagree with that are people that are shilling for the current president and saying, well, but look at the
Or
stock
Wall
market
Street. Yeah.
or Wall Street. Yeah, I mean, sure, if you're an uber rich person, which neither of us are, then yeah, yeah, sure, you get 100 million in the stock market is doing great, regardless of whether it makes any sense or not. But
Yeah.
if you were in the situation that we are economically and everybody believes it's not very good, then why doesn't it change? Because we're too busy dealing with the consequences of that. That's why it takes an externality, which is a war, usually is a war or a depression or something.
And
That's
or depression. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
get the full meal deal, get the war plus the depression for half the price.
Right.
Then that's what it takes to get everybody on the same page. And unfortunately, it's very predictable because that's what's always happened before. And that's, again, I think one of the reasons we do this podcast is to tell Kenny G, hey, look what's happening now. It's going to happen to you. Now, it might happen to you in your space plane on your way to Mars or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's still human nature, and human nature is relatively fixed. It doesn't change very much.
Yeah, and I think the thing that that if Kenny G's listening, I would tell him I don't have any advice on how to stop this stuff.
No.
My goal is for him to understand that he's not alone in going through this. That
Right.
we are going through the same thing. That I have to imagine. I've said this a number of times. I have to imagine there's people in Germany in 1938 just looking around, going, what the hell is happening to our country? Like this
Right.
this is crazy town. Like,
Yeah.
how are these people getting control? How are these people getting people on board with this stuff? How are these lunatics getting support? How are these morons?
Yeah.
Again, I imagine again, like the clip we just saw of the Economist.
Yeah.
There had to be a Germany version of that in 1939 on explain to me how I don't know, like taking over Poland or exterminating the Jews or whatever handful of things that they were working on that I don't know because I'm not a historian. Those are the big ones, obviously. How explain to me how building the biggest military the world's ever seen is going to solve our problems and how we got
Right.
our the short end of the stick in 1914 or 1917
Right.
with a armistice agreement.
Yeah.
Well, but we're building the world's largest military. Okay, but why are we doing that? And what are we gaining from that? Well, we're building the world's largest military. It had to be the same nonsensical conversations, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I think one of the things that hopefully we can encourage Kenny G in the future about also is that the problems right now look so intractable. The amount of debt, the amount of dysfunction, the amount of anger between one group and another, they look like they cannot be overcome. But
Right.
in each one of these situations that we've encountered in history, it turns out that the things we argue about now, they might not even exist as topics in our distant memory in 10 or 15 years. They might if we understand, one of the things that to me is encouraging about these cycles that you and I talk about, Brian, is that they are not linear in one direction or another. If what we were at right now, if the place in this kind of downward spiral economically, culturally, and all these other things, if that were a linear thing, it'd be like, oh my gosh, why do we even continue on? This is just insane.
Right.
But the reality is that since reality itself is self-correcting, it has mechanisms built in, including devastatingly horrible mechanisms built in to reset things periodically. And you could say that's God's plan, which is kind of where I would land, or however you want to say it. That the negativity that we experience right now is ultimately short-lived, even though it appears to be a gigantic, monstrous thing that threatens to eat us all. It's short-lived. So if you would have looked in 1939 Germany, let's take your example there. People probably thought, well, yeah, 1,000-year Reich, and well, I guess this is Germany for the next 10 centuries. Well, and 10 years later, Hitler's gone. The Third Reich is disbanded. The whole thing. So, so Kenny G, if you're listening, there's hope, buddy. It just comes through a dark path.
Yeah, no, I agree. You and I've talked about this before. It's like, if you've gone through a divorce, you'll say simultaneously, that's the worst thing that ever happened. I never want to do that again. But man, I'm so glad it happened.
Yeah, yeah.
it very much feels like that. And so I don't have any advice for Kenny G other than again trying to let him know that he's not alone, and
Yeah.
it sucks for us just like I'm sure it's going to suck for
And it will pass. And it will
and
pass.
it'll pass. Yeah,
It'll
and
pass.
15 years from now we're going to be once again united like we were in the 1950s, and you know, all will be well again. We don't know what that'll look like, and that's part of the thrill of life, right?
That's human. That's human.
And
That's
if we
human
ever
world.
get confused, Dave, we can just call upon that guy. What was his name? And he can explain it to us.
Jared Bernstein.
Yeah, Jared Bernstein. So moving forward, whenever I have questions about anything, Jared's going to be my go-to guy. Like when I want to understand, like you know, how quantum physics works.
You turning your investment portfolio over to him, I suppose. Maybe not.
Yeah,
no?
when I want to understand like how to make my $100 million in Wall Street, he's going to be my go-to guy to answer all questions moving forward, because he really simplified things down to a level I could understand.
He did simplify things. Indeed, he did.
All right. So, as Dave and I have mentioned before, we'd love to get your input. Where do you think we are correctly representing this moment in time? Where do you think we're misrepresenting this moment in time? Which you can do by going to unsilentpodcast.com, or you can also go to our Rumble channel. There's a great comment section there. Easy to put comments there and let us know where you think we're getting it right, where you think we're completely missing it. And I think that's it for this week. Let's see here. Let me check my notes to make sure I didn't forget anything. Doesn't look like I forget anything. So until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.